I was working at the Calgary Herald at the time, and the reporter, writer, Christina Frangu and I teamed up on that story for the paper. But yeah, I met PJ at 9 a.m. and he died at 3 p.m. So I had to build this relationship with someone who I am literally there for the end. It's powerful when someone wants you to share that moment with them, like to actually watch someone take their last breath. I can't even really describe it. Like it's especially when they're taking their last breath and it's under circumstances where they have chose to do that.
My guest today is Leah Hennel. Leah is an international award-winning photojournalist and documentary photographer. Photojournalists use their artistry to bring newsworthy stories to us in moments of chaos, tragedy, or celebration, where most of us are taken away by what's happening. They have to stay ever open for a frame that can tell the rest of the world about what it's like to be there. Some of Leah's work includes global events such as the Olympics and the pandemic. Her images during the pandemic, working with Alberta Health Services, helped to convey the wide-reaching effects and suffering caused by the pandemic. Her image of Dr. Simon Demers-Marcel, an ICU physician in Calgary, as he kneels on the ground calling a family member to inform them that their loved one has passed, was featured across national and international publications. Her photo book, Along the Western Front, conveys the beautiful surroundings and wonderful characters that make up modern ranching in Alberta. I find that Leah's photography and documentary work captures subjects with dignity and respect, telling a story that encompasses their personality, their hopes, the events that have made them who they are, and shows us a part of them that we can all connect with. I appreciate you being here because I know if you have spent the last 20 years conveying stories with images, it's probably quite difficult maybe to talk about it, as that's, I feel like, your preferred go-to art form. And,
I think I always joke with people that I got into photography so I didn't have to talk. I talk with my photos without words.
Right. So for an audio-only podcast, I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to start with a kind of a tough question. And it's only tough because I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but just to convey to audiences about what photojournalism really means, especially with today, everyone has a camera in their hand. And, to go back like 30 years, only very few people had access to the kind of cameras that were required to create these beautiful images and tell these stories. And now pretty much everyone has one. So really, what's the difference between a photojournalist, photo documentarian, and some stranger that's at the same event seeing the same thing?
That's a great question, actually. I still feel like photojournalism is, and what I do is capturing a moment, a feeling. Like when someone looks at a photo that I take, I want them to maybe learn something about the subject I'm photographing, or have an emotion, or show some empathy. But I feel like, everyone does have a camera. But I still feel like as a photojournalist, it's more than just taking a picture. We make a photo and we show a moment.
And you were saying before we started recording that this distinction between maybe photojournalism and documentary photography. How do you see that?
Yeah, so I talk about this a lot with my peers and stuff in photojournalism. I feel like, my roots are in photojournalism, where it was covering breaking news, big news events. And I might not have been at, in a situation or like a scene or something that long. And I feel like documentary photography is where I'm spending way more time with a subject, sometimes years, sometimes weeks, sometimes a full day. But I feel like it's more in-depth photojournalism, but still, I feel like they're virtually the same in that they're visual storytelling.
Right. And when you're showing up to, sometimes, we're talking about like global events like the Olympics, and so there's a press pass and you're expected to be there. But then sometimes you're showing up to like a random person's house and being like, "Hi, I'm also here here to photograph this intimate story of yours." how are you building that rapport? Is it expected? Are they happy to see you there? Or
You know what varies? Like my career, like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years. So sometimes if it was breaking news, and let's say back in my days at the newspaper at the Herald, it would be, if there was maybe there was a homicide or something, and we call them door knocks, where we would go and knock on, a relative's door.
whoa.
And of course, they don't know we're coming to the door. So it would be obviously myself and maybe a reporter. And we would knock on the door. And yeah, the first thing they see is us. And that's, it's hard. I mean, sometimes we got, rightly so, doors slammed in our face. But I think for the most part, people really wanted to talk about their loved one who had died from whatever had happened. In my longer form stuff, I do a lot of research on whatever story I want to cover. I'll either phone call or email the person, but then I'll just go to their house if they invite me, and we'll just sit down and talk like you and I are before I even take photos, to try and be very clear with them why I want to tell their story, where the photos are going to go. I mean, now with social media, these photos are going to go everywhere. So I really want it to be more of a collaborative process, which is totally different from how I work on breaking news, stuff like that for the newspapers.
Right. And when you're going back to like the homicides and these tragic events, do you find, obviously as a photojournalist, if you're going there to cover the news, you're not just covering the person who's passed, but why they have passed. But do you find it sounds to me that you're saying that these people really want to talk more about not the event that's happened, but the person.
Yeah. I mean, for example, at Humboldt, I went to Humboldt and covered that with a writer. And yeah, we did unfortunately, a cold knock on a door of one of the players that had died. And yeah, they wanted to tell the story of their loved one. We all knew already, like the world knew like what had happened. But who was the person who died? What's their story? And why were they so loved? It was like, that's not the case with everyone. And I actually think about it myself, about me, if that would happen to me and someone came to my door, I actually wouldn't want to talk, I don't think.
Right. Why is that?
It is private. I'm like honestly so shocked when people say yes to let me share these stories. I don't know if I could in that situation. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I could talk about. And I'm jumping around here, but like in my life, like my mom died very young. She was 57 with pancreatic cancer. My brother, a few years ago at 40 with a heart attack. And so I always think like, would I want to talk about them? But then I was like, but I want people to know who they were and how amazing they were. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to really like put yourself in that person's shoes, because I always struggle with this, and that sometimes I'm like, I'm a very empathetic person, and but then I'm like, you start to learn about that experience, that really specific experience that's happened to that person. And you're like, there's only so much empathy can take you until it's happened to you. Yeah. So in that moment when you're trying to kind of empathize with them, or sometimes empathy has this like drawback where it's like I've heard it as the distinction between compassion and empathy, right? Compassion is acknowledging someone's pain and suffering, but empathy is feeling it. And let's say, the Humboldt, the bus crash there, and you're going, this is the tragic young loss at a really massive scale. How is that impacting you, and how are you dealing with how it's impacting you?
Great question. That's a good question. I feel like and this isn't a good way to deal with stuff, but I feel like I'm very good at compartmentalizing. I can't even say the word. See, I told you I'm better at taking photos. But
no one can say those words.
I feel like I'm better at, or I've gotten to a point where I can put that away on a shelf and move on. In the moment when I'm maybe, let's say, editing the photos, it really hits me. And I always turn it around on, oh my goodness, like my son is this age, like what, like it's hard. It's very emotional. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, covering COVID in the hospitals and watching people die, or MAID, where I saw PJ die in front of us, that it does wear on you. And lots of journalists will talk about, PTSD and all that stuff. I think I grew up where we didn't, we didn't really talk about our emotions that much. My dad didn't really talk too much about it. So I feel like I'm doing okay, and I have a really good support system. But yeah, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'm just like, but I always turn it around to think about that family member who has lost their loved one. It's way worse for them than it is for me. It's like they're going through it. I'm not. I just see
I'm getting the residual of what they're feeling.
And they're going to deal with it. And I know grief, how it works. They're going to deal with this forever. And so I try to look at it like this is worse for them. Like I'm just literally there for a little bit, or maybe a couple of years I'm following the family, but it's still not the same.
It is this interesting process. I mean, for individuals who, haven't taken like photographs at the professional level, where you have the photograph, you have the meeting and the capturing of the image. And then you have this editing process that's actually a lot longer, and you're kind of really intimately with those photos. And I think just like the smallest things we can see can move us. And that's what really happens in that editing process of, oh my gosh, I didn't even notice this when I was taking that photo. So really like it prolongs like having to sit there and meditate with it in a way that can be uncomfortable. And also maybe is part of the processing.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes I don't edit right away.
Right.
Give it a couple of days, walk away from it, work on a happier, lighter story or something like that. But yeah, it can be hard. And I think I deal with a lot of, I don't want to say guilt. I don't even know how to explain it, but I'm always very conscious and worried that I just really want to make sure I give this person their dignity. And that I struggle with that a lot because I really want to make sure they're okay with, some of the stuff that I cover that is really sad and I'm there for their worst moment. I just want to make sure I'm doing it right and respectfully. Right. And I talked about this before, but that's why in my documentary sort of work, it is a collaboration with the families and the people I'm photographing. I want to make sure they do get to see that photo before I put it out. I wouldn't do that in my breaking news photojournalism world because we can't. But for these longer ones, I feel like they're sharing something that's so sensitive that I want to make sure they're okay with it. Because once it's out there, you can't take it back.
Just the idea of having a camera in an intimate moment, in a loss or tragedy, unless you're like a professional athlete or something, you've lost this thing, and it's awful that the world is seeing it, but it's expected in a way. But just having that camera in there, you're like, oh, that I don't want that. But then I always like wonder if I don't know if I could do it, like what you do, which is like to make that ask, right? To say, I'm going to take a photo here.
Yeah. I just, someone asked that the other day too, is trying to think of an example. It is hard, but I feel like the worst that the person's going to say is no. And I have asked and explained, look, I'm doing a documentary now on dementia, and there's still a big stigma about dementia, and people don't want to share their stories of their loved one or themselves. So I have like explained myself. I've met with the families or the family, and they initially said no or were hesitant. Leave my card. A couple days later, they'll reach out and say, you know what, I do want to share. I've thought about this and I do want to share the story because there needs to be, less stigma out there about it.
But I think one thing that you do really well in your work is all of the, so again, for people who might not be familiar with the terminology in photography, so you have portraiture work, which is more kind of close up on the individual. Those are the beautiful photos that you're seeing of their eyes are very much in focus and they're right there. And then you have your kind of other types of photography. It could be landscape or wider or whatnot. But whether it's your portraits or it's these kind of scenic images that you do with the characters within them, your photography has this ability of capturing individuals and making them kind of, as TikTok and social media would say, their main character vibes. They're very like, you really have this ability to, no matter what that person is going through, I think you have this ability to treat them with that dignity, but also elevate really what they're doing. You highlight them, but in a way that is, it's like you make everyone into like a superhero in a way, I find, with your images. And is that something you're conscious of? Is that an approach that you have? That's how I feel anyways.
Thanks. I've never heard it's interesting what people take from my work, because I have like severe imposter syndrome.
Sure.
So I've been dealing with that for a long time. So it's interesting what people take from, but no, I honestly go into it I look at the light. Like, so obviously I'm there and the person is there, but it's like, photography, the cliche is it's painting with light. But I look at the light, the background is key. And then I just let it play out and happen. And I just try to show whoever I'm photographing with dignity, in whatever walk of life, whoever I'm photographing. And I don't think about what other people are going to think so much from my work. I think about if the person I'm photographing likes it and is comfortable, and if I learn something from the person I'm photographing. But I don't really think about what other people think so much. So it is interesting when you talk about that photo of Dr. Demers Marcel. When I took that photo, I think I took 2 frames. Like, it was very fast moment. It's a little bit back focused. And I didn't think as much of it as other people thought. So it's always interesting. It's interesting to see how people are affected or what they think of my work. Right.
It's the expert kind of perspective on the process and the journey. You're like, oh man, that focus isn't that sharp there. And then meanwhile, everyone's like, look at what's happening in the world. Like that's really what they're seeing from the image. I think this discussion of dignity in terms of portraying that dignity in the subjects of your work, it's really well captured. And I'm just going to refer to my notes here, but in the story that you did about Barbie Harris, can you run me through how you met her and how that came about?
Yeah, Barbie is like I could get choked up talking about her sometimes. I don't know why.
I get choked up very easily. I just got choked up there.
No, Barbie has a place in my heart forever. When I was at the Calgary Herald every Christmas season, we would be maybe assigned or told like, hey, can you go photograph something for this Christmas fund? Mm-hmm. And so it was always like agencies like the Drop-In Center, the Mustard Seed, or whoever it was. And so 3 years prior, I had photographed Barbie as a portrait in the Drop-In Center. I had phoned the Drop-In Center and I said, hey, I'm assigned to take photos of, before it was like, there's some photographers who would take photos of just people walking on the street, bottle picking, but they might not be homeless, right. Quote. So I've always wanted to like go talk to the person, get their name. Anyway, I'd met Barbie. I took this portrait of her and that was it. Done. 3 years later, I'm at the Drop-In Center for kind of the same story. Mm-hmm. And I see Barbie again and she remembered me. And I remember she walked up to me and I was like, Barbie, I'm so tired of just taking your portrait of you standing here. Like, how do you live? Can I come hang out with you? And, and Barbie was, I think 4'8", maybe 100 pounds as a woman living on the streets, couch surfing, all the stuff. I was like, how are you living? And it ended up being like a whole year with her. I would meet her when she was out bottle picking, see her with her friends. She was couch surfing sometimes. I got close to her social worker and we just kind of had this relationship. And sometimes it was close where Barbie, if she had a cell phone at that time, she would phone me to be like, hey, I need a ride here or something like that. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I want to give you a ride. Where do you need a ride? And so if I could, I would. It didn't happen all the time. And then she kind of just disappeared. And I remember going to her usual places and asking people like, where's Barbie? And then her social worker told me Barbie has cancer. She has terminal stage 4 cancer. And then it just got to like, well, how, if you have cancer, and I know what cancer is like from what my mom went through, and my mom had a family, she had a home, she can get a ride to chemo appointments.
And still incredibly difficult.
And still difficult. So how is Barbie going to do this? And so I would go to the hospitals with Barbie when she was there. And going back, like Barbie, super smart woman, super well-read, funny. She just changed my whole perspective on, I never judged people, but she taught me a lot. I learned so much from her on how you don't judge a book by its cover. And just because someone's down in their luck, it doesn't mean whatever, right? You never know what is going on in someone's life. We spent lots of time together, and yeah, she got sick. She had given her daughter up for adoption when her daughter was 5. Barbie was a cook. She had lost fingers, went through I think her husband had died. Progressing forward, the cancer's getting worse, and she meets her daughter again, who I think her daughter at the time when she met her was 20, something like that. So I was there for that moment when she met her daughter again, and I'm crying through my camera. Barbie's crying. It was like this, a beautiful moment. Barbie died. And I went to the funeral, and her sister gave me a card for Mother's Day, and it was from Barbie.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, to my blonde bitch, Leah. It was just like, and I have it in my car. Like, I just like, yeah. And it just opened up this whole thing about like how, Barbie didn't want to go stay in a hospice. Mm-hmm. She's an adult. She still wanted to smoke. Right. If she, whatever, it's just like, if you have cancer and you can go home and you could do what you want. So she still wanted to do what she wanted. And then after that, I had talked to a doctor there's a camp. It's like everyone deserves to die with dignity. And if you want to die, if you want to sit out by the river in a chair, we're going to help you make that happen. And so I thought that was just a beautiful legacy from Barbie's story. And that Barbie story actually was like a chain of events that led into me covering PJ McGrath for Made with the reporter.
For medical assistant.
Yeah, because I guess he had seen the article. And I did write the story on Barbie. I'm not a writer. I have really good editors.
Okay.
I did write the story.
It's a great story.
Yeah, and I wrote it just because Barbie and I spent so much time together, and to earn her trust for someone else to come in, I just felt like I have to do it myself because she gave me so much. So, yeah.
And sorry, just to clarify, camp came out of the story from
Barbie.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was like, everyone deserves to die with dignity. I can't remember what the acronym
Sure. Well, we'll find it. We'll put it in. Who needs acronyms?
I know. So yeah, Barbie was a story. And I feel like my photography, my storytelling has now gone into like, I like telling more stories about women in different communities and cultures.
And what I also was interested about in that story is that how does she now access medical care, right? And who is setting up these appointments for her? How is she getting around, and the difficulty to do so? And it just kind of makes you think like how everyone is affected by health and illness, but also everyone is affected by economic circumstances and things that are sometimes beyond their control, right? And the person behind them, that playfulness, that kind of funny, well-read, intellectual individual who has a lot to, teach you, is still there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think about Barbie all the time when I think about healthcare actually in stories, because I'm lucky. I have a home. I have a family. But if you don't, like, it just, yeah.
Yeah. And so you were mentioning how your work has made you focus more on women, on those subjects, and what kind of their experiences. How are you finding these subjects, and what are you focusing on that might be different?
You know what? Honestly, I do find stories and subjects on what I'm interested in. And so, I used to teach photojournalism, and I know lots of people are like, well, how do you find a story? And I would always say, find something. What are you interested in? What do you want to learn more about? So I look at it as like, I'm educating myself, but also telling someone else's story. And maybe that would help educate someone else. And maybe that would just help us, if everyone could just be kind to each other and learn from these stories from like Barbie or, but yeah, I honestly find stories like the dementia one I'm doing now is because my father-in-law died last year from complications from dementia. And so, I got interested. I didn't know anything about dementia. I mean, I knew about dementia. I'd cover stories on dementia, but nothing in depth. And then when you are living in it in the moment, it just,
Yeah. It's, are you okay talking about
that
experience?
Yeah.
What was that like of kind of taking care of him or being involved in his care at all and also seeing that decline?
Yeah. So I was like, again, because I'm, the daughter-in-law,
Right.
I could be on the outside. So I watched my husband and his siblings and his mom go through this. And it was awful. It was like learning that person isn't there anymore. And like, it's your dad, but it's not the same.
Right.
So it was awful. And I mean, the care that my father-in-law got and stuff, the caregivers, that's amazing. I couldn't do that. When I'm photographing like in hospitals and the frontline workers, I could not do what they do. Like, it is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so glad we have people that go into this field, because I wouldn't be able to do it.
Everyone needs to find their thing, the thing that they can do that others can't. And I think, healthcare is definitely one example of that, but also the work that you're doing, right? I think it would be really hard to do what you're doing in terms of like capturing these stories, and also really just what I find really difficult is having that really intimate relationship with that person for the short amount of time, and then also having to like leave it then.
Yeah. And so I don't leave it.
Right.
Sometimes I become friends with them, but like I still try to keep in contact with most people that I photograph and do long-term stories on. I actually just genuinely like people, and I like the people I photographed. And it's hard not to become close to someone when you are spending. It doesn't even have to be a lot of time with someone. When you're spending that moment where they're just like a very sensitive topic, or they're going through the worst moment in their life, it's hard not to get attached to that person.
Well, you get to really see them for who they are, and really you're part of the moment that is really building their character, or they're kind of conveying that to you. It's their core of who they are, and isn't that what a really good friendship is? Is that when you've built the trust to get to that place where you can share that with another individual, and having the privilege to get to be part of that.
Definitely.
I wanted to circle back on kind of grief and dementia with what your father-in-law went through, and also with what your mom, if that's right there.
Yep.
You mentioned that, learning that grief is not this thing that like happens and it's done with. Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
It was funny. I did this talk once, and someone was like, wow, Leah's so weird. She photographs death and she talks about grief. And I was like, but that's life. It's happy, it's sad, it's this roller coaster, and we don't talk enough about death or grief. I was really young when my mom died. So I was 24, 25. I was going through like stuff in my life too. So like when she died, I didn't get it.
Right.
I didn't get how, so I'm 45. So my mom, this January 20th, it'll be 20 years I've been without my mom. And I've had a kid, I've been divorced, I've got remarried, and I've had this career, and I can't talk to my mom. And I still feel like I just want to pick up the phone and talk to her. And I see it with my husband's family that, the firsts are always really hard. People always talk about the first dinner that they're not there, and they see this empty chair, but it's never ending. Like, it's like, it could, But I look at it too, is that I'm lucky that I had a really good relationship with my mom and my brother. And I do miss them. I know there's people that didn't, have lost loved ones and didn't have closure because maybe they weren't talking at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. Even the language. I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about, it comes down to what do you think you know about that thing, and what do you actually know about it? And the language around grief of getting through it, you're going to be all right. Like, how do we deal with this? And
and like, I mean, people like, I was talking about this with my husband, like people kind of just forget after, like, you have so many people there that are in the moment when you lost this person or they died, and they're like dropping casseroles off, and they're texting you and checking in on you, and then they're just gone. And I feel like it's like, yes, holidays are a hard time and birthdays and all that stuff, but it's every day. Like I don't go a day without thinking about my brother or my mom. So it's like, yeah, we just don't talk about it. So when I photograph people who are going through this, I know that like, it's just going to get harder. Sometimes
right.
you learn, it doesn't get easier. You just learn how to deal with it. It is. And I think a lot about like my brother, like I said, was 40 and my niece at the time was 9. My son had just turned 13. And I think about them, especially my niece not having her dad there for a moment. So that chokes me up.
Yeah. Because you've gone through it.
Yeah. Right? I just know it's going to be, it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, opening up about that. And it's something that I still have my parents with me. They're getting older, and I constantly think about that of like, even death at an unexpected age is tragic, and it is different, and grief comes in many forms. Yeah. But I do think about like, I'm like, no one's talking about them getting older and how do you deal with the loss of your parent and stuff, even though it's universal. We're all going to deal with it. No one's talking about access to healthcare, how many small little steps you are away to homelessness. We're all quite secure until we're not.
Yeah.
And
like Barbie said, everyone's a paycheck or a divorce away from, and it's true for most of us anyway. And then,
and then the other form of grief of dementia as well, which is, it's learning to say goodbye to them while they're still here. And it's a bizarre concept. It's kind of like your body's fighting it. It's like, what do you mean? That's my dad, or this is now your dad. This is the new person. That they are.
And they're like, they're physically there and you could see them. And I tried to think about, I don't know what was worse. I always think about it like, so with my father-in-law, is it worse? Obviously dementia is terrible, but then he was physically there, or it was like my mom knew she was dying, or my brother who just died like suddenly. Like what is better like for the family or for, and I've come to realize like it all is terrible. Like it's all hard. I couldn't imagine being my mom and like planning her funeral and writing out like, I don't know if that'd be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, all three of those are pretty brutal. Right?
I don't know what's, but then I think about death a lot. Yeah. I do think a lot about death and healthcare and It's funny, right? Because it feels like you have to justify that statement, but you shouldn't. Like I think about death a lot. It's like, what? Why? What's wrong? Different cultures, okay? I feel like here in North America, we don't talk about it. And it's not, this is a terrible word, but death isn't like, I don't even know what word I can use to say like, there's not, you think about in Ireland, they have a wake. It's like a celebration of this person. Or in other cultures, right? Where it's more like a spiritual, like it like helps the grieving process. But I feel like here, it's just like, we don't talk about it.
Yeah, our grieving process is also very commercialized too.
Oh,
it's kind of we won't get into that on this podcast.
No, I can tell you about this necklace I have with my brother's thumbprint, and I'm always like, is that his thumbprint? Right. Did I just pay for that? Yeah. And it's someone else's.
Right. Is that like a what do you call it? Like a stock photo that they took and
totally.
They just printed? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the bills and everything, and it's that's the brutal aspect of it. I mean, losing the very little loss that I've dealt with losing my grandmother to cancer. We had a lot of time with her in terms of hospice and seeing her suffer and everything, and it's a natural age, that we would expect someone to pass away. So there was a lot of that, and seeing the end of the suffering. So a lot of that was maybe. I don't know if cathartic is the right word for it, but it made sense, but then, when you're exposed to these things that don't make sense of, okay, well, like they were so young, why did they die? Why are they changing in front of me? But again, like it's not, these things are not going to be easy, but if you don't talk about it and you don't have experience with it, they're going to be a lot harder.
Yeah. And you know what I do, going back like to the photography and all this stuff with, I did photograph my mom at the hospital and stuff, but I've never done anything with those photos. And it's like, I'm photographing people in their worst moments and I photograph one of mine. And I haven't done anything with them.
Yeah. You haven't like pulled them up, edited?
No, like the only thing I have that I've share is like, a selfie before a selfie, like on my SLR holding it out.
Right.
Selfie of my mom and I, and she's got tubes in her nose and stuff. And we're at the hospital. And that was like, yeah, I haven't, I had photos of like my dad there with her holding hand, but I haven't done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's different compared to the journalistic work. I mean, it's one thing. It's very simple to look at it in paper and say, "Oh, a photograph is a photograph. Why haven't you edited this?" But I think just the act of taking the photograph and whenever you're ready, and you don't even need to be ready to ever edit them. Right?
No, and like that's how I think was how I deal with like a lot of the harder stuff I photograph. Is that's when I do go out and drive in the country and take photos. That's how I put away all the other stuff.
Right. Of like scenic photos and stuff like that?
Yeah, scenic photos or like the Western photos that I do, like along the Western Front was a lot of work that I did. Like, I went to a branding on a Hutterite colony that my brother actually wanted to come to. So it was like a month after he died. And I went and it was like a healing thing to like just not, Yeah,
to engage with their memory in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Medical assistance in dying. Was there, this is kind of earlier on in the process.
Yeah, it was 2017. So I might get this wrong. PJ was one of the first or few in Alberta. Well, definitely that let us tell his story. I was working at the Calgary Herald at the time, and the reporter, writer, Christina Frangu and I teamed up on that story for the paper. But yeah, I met PJ at 9 a.m. and he died at 3 p.m. So I had to build this relationship with someone who I am literally there for the end. It's powerful when someone wants you to share that moment with them, like to actually watch someone take their last breath. I can't even really describe it. Like it's especially when they're taking their last breath and it's under circumstances where they have chose to do that and all that stuff. Like
and their family's there.
There. And so that was interesting because we had walked into the room and he was, for what his daughters were there, but didn't expect to walk in and see someone with a camera there. And so
did they not know?
No. So it got very tense. It was very, they were very upset. I get it. Yeah. And so we had left the room and I had thought at that point, this story's done. Like we're not, and PJ explained to him why we were there and why he chose to tell his story. So we were just going with what he said, and the daughters agreed, as long as we didn't photograph them in a way where you couldn't identify them. I did do a photo of them where you could see their face with their dad. Yeah, we were there for like, he had his last meal. He went up on the balcony at the hospital to have his last smoke.
Wow.
And in the moment I'm thinking about, I have to get this right. I can't go back. Like this is literally, I only have this moment. Yeah. So it was like I did feel a lot of pressure to get it right, to get what PJ wanted. Hopefully he would have been happy with it. I think the daughters reached out to the writer after and just said, thank you. So that felt good. But yeah, it was really interesting being there. It was interesting too, that some people that didn't, I don't want to say believe, but didn't think he should have done it or for whatever reason, if they were staff or whatever, they did come by and give him a hug and say, and then they just left the unit. Didn't.
Oh, some healthcare staff who maybe thought this wasn't the choice that they would have made or something. Yeah.
And so they gave him a hug because he had been there, I think, for 10 months and like couldn't walk and his neck was,
Well, coming out of that story, was there any, what was the, I don't want to say backlash, but what did you hear anything from that story in terms of because it's very controversial.
And I did from some people that I know, it's very controversial. And I did hear from some people who were like, this is wrong and you shouldn't do it. And some people had said they kind of put themselves in PJ's shoes and what kind of life is this? Right.
Right.
But at the end of the day, honestly, I'm just like, everyone has a right to whatever their opinion. I might not. I might think that I might disagree, but I as long as everyone is kind to each other.
Right.
You could like just be nice.
Yeah. I think, and when it comes down to these things that we don't talk about often, that we have very little experience with ourselves in terms of terminal illness and what it's like, or debilitating illness. It can get heated, but I think it's an important thing to remember of you're going to have different opinions, and that's okay. And it's probably not going to change.
And you should also tell your family what your goals of care, your personal directives. Like I've learned all this stuff from my work in hospitals because I was just like, well, they should know what I want, but I've never written anything down. I think I got a will when I went to Sochi in Moscow. My son was 9 and I didn't have a will. It's like I should probably do this.
Yeah. We'll put a note in of the kind of the process of setting that up in terms of in the show there. Okay, so this is an important point that Leah is bringing up, and we both thought it best to include a 5-minute segment on this in the show about advanced directives. And we'll cover this further and more in depth in a future episode. But for now, you may have heard of or talked to your family member about a no CPR order or a do not resuscitate order. These are early examples of advanced directives that are really limited in scope. The advanced directive that we're talking about is broader than this kind of simple order. It focuses on general healthcare decisions and acts as a guide for your substitute decision maker. Unfortunately, the language and laws around this varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So let's just briefly go over some of the basics around an advanced directive and some actionable steps that you can take to fill this out either for yourself or for a family member. Okay, so here's what you need to know. An advanced directive sets out who is the individual making these decisions for you when you're not able to. This person is called the substitute decision maker, sometimes also referred to as proxy decision maker, surrogate decision maker, attorney, agent, etc. It's really important to clarify that with your specific jurisdiction, but it's commonly referred to now as the substitute decision maker. This advanced directive document needs to be completed when you're competent, so when you're healthy and have the capacity to make decisions and understand their consequences. These ideas captured by the document can be in discussions, but it's really best to sit down and have the conversation. Fill out a document that is recognized in your jurisdiction. It's going to save a lot of pain and perhaps legal challenges in the future. Advanced directives encompass longer-term decision-making and are used as a guide for your substitute decision maker. These decisions and wishes are often guided by goals of care rather than specific examples, although you can include that in the document as well. The goals of care can be broad. For instance, what life do you want and deem worth living? What conditions would you like at the end of life? Where would you like to be? For instance, would you like to be at home if possible? What steps should be taken or should not in terms of your recovery or interventions? What kind of pain management do you want? What do you fear? What's most important to you in life? What are some things you'd like at the end of life? Would you like family around, music played, photographs brought in, considerations of your religious or spiritual perspectives? What about your privacy and dignity? Who would you want informed about your health or not informed? Again, this isn't just decision making at the end of life, but it can also be when you lose the capacity to make these decisions, when you're in the ICU or are left with a mental impairment. I'll emphasize this once more. The advanced directives are designed to encompass broader decision-making and are purposely broad as medical decisions in health can change quickly. So, for instance, you may not want to be resuscitated. Okay, but this could change in 2 scenarios. In the first, you're at the end of your life on the breathing machine and ill with a chronic condition that's not going to improve, and staff inform your family if you were to recover, you would not be able to be taken off the breathing machine. In this scenario, you may not want to be resuscitated because your quality of life, your abilities after, isn't aligned with your wishes. But in another scenario, you may be going into a routine surgery and had unforeseen complications. In this case, resuscitation, and after a short stay in the hospital, could allow you to return to life as you knew it, or a life that you deem worth living and worth your health. So your decision for resuscitation changes. That's why it's important to discuss these things in broader terms, such as goals of care, to help your substitute decision maker make those decisions for you. So you've thought about this stuff and now you want to write it down. You can use some of the guides linked in our show notes. I just want to say that it's important to write this stuff down in a document that is recognized by your jurisdiction. But it's also important to have these conversations with your family members. Conditions around our health at the end of life can be vague, unexpected, and change rapidly. And our lives and we as people also change. So an ongoing discussion can help your substitute decision maker and family know what you want. What if you want to do this for someone in your family? I've tried having this discussion with my parents a few times, and I can tell you it's not easy. And they're perfectly healthy and have experience with caring for people at the end of life. I just feel awkward and morbid for bringing it up, and then sad for thinking about it, and sometimes confused by the range in their answers, which could be different depending on how they're feeling that day or the way that I'm asking a question or what questions I'm asking. Now, I've used the guides linked in the show notes personally to have these conversations with them, and it's made it a lot easier to understand for myself and for them. I genuinely feel like after chatting about it, I know their wishes better. I'm glad that it's documented somewhere. I know what I'd want, and I feel more connected to them. So begin a dialogue. It could be in passing. You can set some time aside to discuss it. Use the guides to fill out general responses. Take breaks because it can be tough to think about these scenarios. And try to remember you're doing this to make sure that either yourself, if it's your advance directive, or your family member have the care they want and deserve at the end of life, and to make it easier for you to know you're doing the right things for them. And so you were working with AHS, Alberta Health Services, before the pandemic began?
Yes. So I left the Calgary Herald in 2019 and took a job at AHS as a photographer in their storytelling team, communications, storytelling. And so I was there. I came in March 2019, and I think the first case in Alberta was March of 2020. So I was there exactly a year before it happened.
You had a year to warm up.
I had a year to warm up. I had a year to, and I am not I know nothing about healthcare. I am not a medical doctor. I like nothing. I know from being a patient.
Right.
So I was, I talk about this stuff now, but even photographing my first surgery, I didn't know how I was going to react. I've seen it on Grey's Anatomy.
It's different when you can hear it.
Yeah. And smell it.
Yeah. All right.
And the lighting is terrible. It's not like what you see in TV. I don't know who plans hospitals, but let's get the lighting a little better.
Right. Can we make this a bit more cinematic?
Right? Yeah.
Do you really have to see that vein? Come on.
Or it's just it's this fluorescent mixed with daylight. It's terrible.
Oh, the white balance.
Everyone looks terrible.
Brutal.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Cameras are great nowadays.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I turned everything to black and white.
Right. Well, and then not to make light of the pandemic, but I do wonder, you're taking these images and you're like, man, they're wearing masks. They're wearing all this eye protection. Where is the person in this?
And keep it I'm wearing the same stuff.
Right.
So I have the mask on and I'm photographing through it. But it's I don't even know if I've processed photographing all that stuff yet, because it's I just kind of put it away. So I haven't really. I look at it now oh, I wish I did this, or I wish I had photographed that. And I got really close to the staff. Some of us are friends and we still talk. And like I said, they're the true superheroes. I mean, I watched staff resuscitate CPR on a patient I've never seen that. In my news days at the newspaper, we would come up to an accident scene or something, but in my career, I was never the first there. So everything, by the time I arrived, everything was done. So I'd never seen that. So to be in that little confined space and see that, it was, they really work hard to save someone's life. It gave me goosebumps. It was amazing.
It makes you realize where medicine is and what it takes to save someone's life. It's not this,
But it was a very controlled, chaotic, very calm mask. I don't even know. I see it in my head and it was just this, I didn't know that the staff, you spell each other off, right? Because it's like a lot of work to do chest compressions, but I didn't know that.
The pandemic has begun, and is there a discussion of, okay, we want to document this, or is it just like, we're going to document it? That's given.
Yeah, I just think we did what we were supposed to do, is just storytelling and document frontline staff.
And so were you processing like everyone's staying home and I'm getting up and going to the hospital during this thing, especially at the beginning when it's not known how lethal it is? In the beginning,
I was really worried. I was worried about bringing something home to my husband and my son. And so I would change in the garage. And we have a detached garage. So when I got home from the hospital, I would change. My husband would put my house coat in there and I'm running into the house, have a shower. In the beginning, we did not know. And I just knew that I had a job to do. And my job is to document what is happening. And so I also documented outside of the hospitals as well. Yeah, because I was still working. I still work on, side freelance jobs for whoever. And so that was stuff like happening outside, drive-in movie theaters, drive-through Eid celebrations.
Yeah,
graduations. And that's how I was like, well, how Ramadan is here. How are they going to celebrate Eid? Like what's going to happen? So, phoning the community and finding out what's happening, graduations, the drive-in grads, because no matter what you thought about the pandemic, everyone was affected. Whether, unfortunately people lost jobs maybe, but we were all affected. It didn't matter what you thought about it, right? Everyone was living it. And so I wanted to document that.
You were saying that there were sometimes individuals were seeing the photos and some comments are saying this isn't real. It's not happening.
Yeah. I have members of my own family that said that, I mean, I know what I saw, and what I saw was real. So it was hard to deal with that in the beginning. Now I'm more, it is hard. It's hard to be like, it is real. It did happen and people died. Mm-hmm. So yeah. That is hard.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the historical role of photojournalism, it's to bring like home moments that you might not believe either are happening, or we're talking about things historically like genocide and mass kind of like destruction of cities and environments and forests and whatnot, and it's also to drive home the effect on the individuals and maybe like wake people up. Historically, when the photos are widely spread, it does have a lot of change. And so I bet it would be quite weird to be like, this time around, it's like, nah.
Well, and then it all goes to like, everyone has a camera and people don't believe that. I mean, with Photoshop and AI now coming out, it's like, where's the truth, right? So yeah, it's hard. It's a hard time to be a photojournalist right now.
Yeah.
Or a documenter, from whatever you want to say. It's hard.
I always thought that a photojournalist was really, you have the reporter, writer, and the photojournalist is like, all right, I'm going to come with you and we'll see what we get.
What people think, but I describe it as like photojournalists. We are journalists. We are storytellers. We're the ones that are on the scene, site. Like it's usually us passing information back. Not all the time, but to the writer. And especially during the pandemic, it was mostly photographers that go out there. I mean, you look at the photographers who are war correspondents, they're on scene. Like we can't, sports photography, we have to be right there. So photographers around the world, they couldn't stay home, if they were documenting the pandemic or like we have to be there. We have to be in those situations covering wildfires.
And you're relaying the information and stuff. And then somebody is writing
Somebody will write it,
right.
Yeah.
Wow,
I think photojournalists
I can't believe they're taking the credit. What is this?
Don't get me started. My husband's was a sports reporter. He has since left that industry. But yeah, we would joke like we have to be there. And if we miss it, we miss it. So, covering sports, like I like sports photography because it seems like it is like photojournalism. It's just pure. You are there and it's happening in front of you.
Right.
And so we can't write off a TV of what happened in the Flames game. We have to be right there.
Can't take screenshots.
We can't take screenshots.
Yeah. So we're talking about, maybe missed photographs of moments, but I wonder, are there moments that you've maybe put the camera to your eye and said, nah, I'm not going to take a photo?
That's a really good question. I think I always do I don't want to say always. I think I do take the photo, but then I don't put it anywhere. There was an incident like when I was working in newspapers full time, a car accident just near here actually. And I didn't know it at the time. Myself and another photographer were standing there, and it was the dad of the child who was just in this car accident and died. Actually was driving by and recognized the car and showed up on scene, got out of his car and ran over. And it was this, and we both looked at each other and we're like, we're not shooting that. Yeah. And the editors were like, and yeah, it would have been a dramatic photo, but I was just like, I feel like, yeah, we both looked at each other, so we're not photographing it. And our editors wouldn't have known because no one else is there. And we just had this. So that stuff has happened. And and at the time, if I would have taken that photograph and it ran, and then you would have seen that and legally, yes, I can. Yeah. But is it right? I don't know. I guess maybe if I would have taken that photo, and I've done this with my stuff that I like, more sensitive stuff, I photograph and then I show the person the photo. So even during COVID, all those photos that went in that book, I sent them the photos. I showed them the photos. I was like, are you sure you're okay with this? Right. So yeah, it's interesting.
So there was one story in the book with your work on COVID and the pandemic, where you went, and there could be multiple, but you went back. The family had lost their loved one, and then you went back to their home. Yeah.
Yeah. I got super. Chuck is his name. He came into the hospital, obviously very sick. Ended up getting COVID, and I remember my first meeting with him. He was on the COVID unit, and he reminded me of my dad. So right away I was like, oh, you're so like my dad. And he showed me a picture that his granddaughter had drawn for him, told me his granddaughter had red hair. And I was like, oh, my son has red hair. And we were talking about it. And I was just like, anyway, so he signed consent. So there is consent forms that when I do my work, just like a model release for if you're doing commercial work, signed consent. Then he FaceTimed with his wife, and I got the number of his wife. And I think I phoned her the next day. He had gotten transferred that night to ICU. And then I phoned her and I met up with her. She had to wait to come to the hospital because she was sick too. And when she finally ended up at the hospital, I talked to her. She was going into ICU. I explained what I was doing. And I remember her just shaking her head and kind of smiling and be like, Chuck hates photos. He would never say yes to photos. I can't believe he said yes to you. And so she was like, well, yeah. And so we documented it. He was in the hospital for a long time. And unfortunately, the outcome wasn't that great. He died. And I kept in touch with Dixie, went to her home. My colleague also did video of an interview with her, but I went to her home and she showed me Chuck's ashes. And then I gave her all the photos, and if she was okay. And she did say, when someone had asked her, that the photos helped her know that they were making the right decision to let him go. So she said that helped, because I was like, it must be hard to look at these photos. That's interesting with that, because some people and look at the photos and they can't, because it was awful. Yeah.
You say look at the photo. They can't look at the photos.
Yeah, they can't look at the photos because it just is too hard. Whether not that they were attached to that person in the photo, but their loved one died during the pandemic, not from COVID necessarily, but died in that, so they were living, they had lost someone. So these photos bring up memories of that moment, even years before of having someone die. It was just too hard to, young people that didn't get to have a graduation don't like looking at the book either, because it just brings back we had a drive-in grad.
One thing that I've learned is the importance of maybe documenting your loved one when they are approaching the end, recording, as we were talking about before, their voice or just like pictures with them, even if they're, obviously these are not well lit situations, but they're not looking their best and everything. But the importance of documenting so that you have the option to look back on. But then at the same time, now I wonder, it's like, is that advice that's appropriate for everyone?
I don't think it would be appropriate for everyone. No, it's up to, like, I'm so used to talking about death. Like, I not grew up around a death. I mean, we all grow up around death, right? People are always dying. But I think some people, it would be harder for them. I do think everyone would want to have a photo of their loved one. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be near the end. I mean, photos are so important. We take photos at birthdays, at weddings,
or appetizer.
Like, we all have a phone. So like, I noticed that when my brother died, his wife, my sister-in-law, Wendy, and my brother, Kirk, they always took photos of each other, like selfies. Mm-hmm. They had tons. And I sometimes say, like, when I die, there's going to be no photos of me.
You're the photographer.
I hate being photographed and I don't like selfies and like all this stuff. So, it's important to have those moments, because now I look back at these photos of my brother and he's happy, and I love that. And, I wish I had more photos of my mom. I wish I could hear her voice again. I have my brother's he died when he was 40. So he was almost 41 and I had just turned 39, and he left me a birthday message on my phone. I still have it. So I have this audio recording of his voice, and it's so precious to me. So I feel like it is important.
I'm trying to fast fire round, and it's not really a fast fire round.
Okay.
But it's that you don't need to go too deep into the questions, but the questions are bigger. But what are some pieces of advice that you would have wanted to have when you were starting out? Not necessarily that. And the second question is, what are some pieces of advice you'd give to someone who's starting out now? But what I want to know is, what would you have told yourself, I guess, when you were starting out?
Oh my goodness, those are all great questions. What I guess I'll start. What would I have? I joke that I wish I would have gone and been a veterinarian, because then I can afford to do what I love. But I've been lucky, so I can't say that. I think the advice, again, this could go for any career. I think the advice I wish I had is that people would not care that much about what other people think of you. And I'm saying that in terms of my career. I have imposter syndrome for this career. I've always had it. I'm getting better at it, but it's it was hard in the beginning when you constantly hear negative stuff because this industry is so competitive.
Right.
So I wish to myself then I wish I would have focused more on what I wanted to do and with myself, and then just do good work and not be so concerned with the nastiness sometimes of the industry. Right. I think advice for someone coming out, I mean, again, we talk about, people keep saying photojournalism is dying. Maybe it is dying in the way it's with newspapers, but I feel like if this is your passion and you want to do this, just go ahead and do it. But also find a side job so you can pay your bills. Because it is hard. But it's hard. It's a lot of work. I think sometimes I don't give myself credit enough for how hard I work in this business. And I'm constantly working still. When I'm off from the hospital, I'm working evenings and weekends doing my own personal projects. It's a grind, but I love it. So yeah, I guess it's the same advice that you would give anyone. Those are good questions. I'm trying to picture myself as that student sitting,
right?
What I would do.
I think one thing I like is that you were talking about, it's 5% is the photo.
Oh yeah, research is key. No. Definitely research. And I say this, but find something that you're interested in photographing. Mm-hmm. An example, of course I know where honey comes from, the bees, and all this stuff, but I'd never seen it made, right, and followed the process through. So I was like, that's a great photo essay. I'm going to go photograph where honey comes from and a beehive and the beekeepers. And so I did. I brought my son with me on that one. He was like 6. He got stung, so he's still afraid of bees. I think the advice too is for women in this industry is you can have a family and do this job. I got told so many times sitting in that desk in journalism, photojournalism school that, you got to choose. You can't have both. But I think you can.
Yeah, didn't you in the project where you were following the ranchers? Didn't you like show up one day with like your baby strapped to your chest?
Yeah,
and, like ready to
yeah.
go?
Like I brought my son Hunter with me on assignments when I could. Again, and I did it as a single parent until my son was 3 and I met my husband. But I had like my dad, like after my mom died while I was pregnant, and my dad helped out. So I worked those shift works and stuff like that. So I was lucky in that I had family support. Yeah, but I think if a female in this industry, you can do it. I look at, I love some of the photographers like Lindsay Adario. Her work is amazing and she's a parent. She covered wars while she was pregnant.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like, yeah. And I think too, actually having that advice where someone said I couldn't do something or you can't do this, you can't still, I guess like work on personal projects or freelance and also be lucky to have a job. Like you can't do that. It just makes me do it more.
Right.
So I'm like the opposite where it's like, if someone says I can't do something, I'm going to be like, well, why? Yeah. I think I can.
Again, fast fire, not really fast fire, but what's something you would, if I know someone that's lost someone in my life or going through something that's difficult or caring for a parent going through dementia or, a really tough illness, how can others support them?
Don't forget about them. Check in on them. Like, don't send a text, say, hey, how are you doing? I feel like people forget about, especially after that person has died, they forget.
Yeah.
It could be like, it's constant. So yeah, just, reach out during the holidays, check in and say, just thinking of you.
And then, that's a great piece of advice there. I think just even hearing it can be enough to give that person that extra boost to say, hey, you have permission to. It's okay. Like there's no right way to.
And it's easy to check in on someone now, right? Like we have social media. You don't, if you're afraid of phoning or whatever, send a text, a Facebook message, whatever.
Or a little voice text. I found voice text.
Yeah, voice text. Exactly. Yeah.
If I wanted to take, what's a good way to take a photo of somebody with just your phone? What are a couple general tips?
Oh, that's good. I'm trying to think now. I'm like, I always tell people like if they're, with their phone, like if you see a good window light, nice window light, like find the nice window light and then, put the person where you could see that nice light, not directly into the window, but so that nice window light is lighting them and then take a photo that way.
Yeah. What are some, what's been something that stayed with you or surprised you in your work? Sometimes I think about like little things that have happened to me that just constantly come up in my head. Of like, oh, okay, this is an interesting lesson or that's changed the way I might do something. Either
I honestly, I guess it's not little, but like Barbie. I constantly think about Barbie and how she's changed my work and how consent is a big thing. To go up and talk to someone instead of just assuming something. So like that she has stayed with me a lot. Like I think about her a lot when I'm photographing. I know funny moments. Like I said, I'm a klutz. So I'm always worried about tripping on cords and stuff. And in healthcare, that's an issue when I'm in a tiny room. Right. I'm always worried about unplugging something.
Right.
So that stays with me a lot.
Yeah.
Just to watch my surroundings.
Yeah. If you find yourself in an ICU, look around.
Yeah. Be careful.
Is there anything that you've learned from this that you find yourself, talking to your son about or talking to family members about, and like let's say they're going through something, they're talking about something difficult, and you're like, this one thing that I saw, or this event that
I find
witnessed.
I talk more to my photographer friends about that stuff. I find that my family, when they're going through it, probably doesn't want to hear what I have to say. And I don't talk about my work a lot with my family. I'll send my husband like photos that I take and like, oh, look at the light. But I do talk to my son about stuff, whether he's listening or not, about different communities, different cultures, trying to educate him, right? I talk to him a lot about being kind.
Yeah.
But like in terms of like, I mean, I get, when we're sitting around a dinner table and my family's there, I feel, because sometimes honestly I have to pinch myself for what I have experienced and photographed is amazing. But then when you're sitting down at a family dinner, I feel like I don't want to.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Like, I come from a family of accountants and engineers and stuff. So I don't know if they're interested in what I have to say.
Right. No.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to like your humility with it.
Yeah,
if I had seen the stuff you've seen and been able to capture it and work with the people that you have, I would not stop talking about it.
I joke too, because like my brother would be like, so what'd you do at work today, Kirk? And he was like, was an accountant. And then I'd be like, oh, I went up in a hot air balloon and photographed the McMahon Stadium. I was just like, it just feels like, yeah, you're bragging.
Right.
Or like lots of people don't like to talk about sensitive topics. I mean, I do actually, going back, I do talk not a lot. I do talk about death with my son and what happens to me if I get dementia or whatever, like what I want him to do.
Yeah. And that's, I think that, if anything to take away from these conversations around death, that's a big one, right? Because until you find yourself in that situation and you don't know it, you don't want to be making choices, given that if your parent is going through something or your loved one is going through something that's bringing them to the end of their life, it's really hard to then be the decision maker for them if you don't have those conversations. Not just because it's hard to make those choices, but also because things will change quite quickly.
Yeah.
And so you want to have that ability to have, understand what their wishes are. And these conversations don't need to be really like specific.
No, and they don't need to be sad. Like even my son who's 19, we talk about like, oh, he goes snowmobiling a lot. So we're always very worried about avalanches. And so he joke be like, if I go in an avalanche, I want like this and this done, right? So we kind of like, it's like in passing, not really as a joke, but kind of making light of it. So like, I know what my son wants at 19 if something happens, but I don't like thinking about it, but we do kind of joke and like talk about like,
Yeah, and it'll help those situations in the future, and it'll also help the aftermath too of like, oh, I made the right choice, and
totally, yeah.
Just to round up, I guess the last thing I always ask my guests is, what are you grateful for? What's something that's bringing you joy?
My son. I'm grateful for. Well, that's a good question. What am I grateful for? I'm grateful for my family. And I'm grateful that I've had this amazing career. I really, really love storytelling and I love photography. I'm so passionate about it. And I'm lucky. Yeah.
I just want to thank Leah for joining me today and having this conversation, as well as our mutual friend Jordan Drake for making the introduction. Additionally, I'd like to thank everyone who shared the show and followed it and reached out to share their thoughts with me. I appreciate you listening to these episodes. If you'd like to support the show, feel free to follow it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a review, and share it with someone that you think would be interested in these conversations. Thank you for listening. I hope you're well.